Welcome back to this week's episode of the State of Recruiting, your weekly Horns 24/7 recruiting podcast. I'm Mike Roach, and I'm joined as always by Hudson Standish. We've got a big week of visits to recap. We've got some crystal balls were put in this week, commitment, and the 2024 rankings. So, going to be a big show. But before we get into all that, how's it going, Hudson?
It's going great, Mike. I'm pumped. Good to have you back. I kind of missed you on the pod.
Yeah, I had to get away and take care of some personal business. When you got an anniversary, football doesn't get in the way. So I took my wife out of town for a couple of days to celebrate our ninth wedding anniversary. So it was a good time. I'm glad to be back. We actually both got sick on the trip. So I was kind of sick before we left town. Just I thought it was allergies, and it may have just been like a sinus infection or something. And then she caught whatever I had. So it's been it wasn't the best it could have been, but it was still a pretty good trip overall. While I was gone, Texas hosted a big recruiting weekend in which they got a commitment. Of course, if you're a member of the Horns 24/7 board, you know that it's a fact that if Mike Roach goes on vacation or leaves town, there will be a commitment. Just about every time I think I've gone, it's happened. I think the only time it hasn't happened was this past February when I went out of town. No, I'm
You're gonna
wrong. I
get you're
think
gonna get some tickets in the mail. Arch is gonna set his official visit, and all these boosters are gonna start flooding your mailbox with like tickets to Cancun and Paris.
I'm here for it. So
Yeah.
my wife's aware of the bit. She's like, "Well, we can set up a GoFundMe if your readers just want to send us on vacation permanently, whatever it takes." So,
Yeah, the
uh,
more exotic the location, the better the commitment will be. Let's get a Mike to Bora Bora.
yeah, if you want to send me to Bora Bora, I'm all for it. And I need first class tickets if I'm going to be on a flight that long. It was a big weekend. I think we talked a lot about this in the week leading up to it. It didn't have Arch Manning attached to it, but top to bottom, a deeper weekend. I thought a lot of talent made its way to campus, saw practice, took part in the all gas 23 recruiting event. Which kind of seemed like just a hangout, eat some barbecue and crawfish, look at some Lamborghinis that were on the field, uh, just have a good time. And, we got a lot of really good feedback about it. I've talked in the past about how, this staff, I think, struggled a little bit out of the gates with hosting these big visit weekends. Just trying to, when you're a staff as a whole, support staff, coaching staff, all that, you've got to really know how to gel with one another, just like you would on the field. And to kind of pull these big visits off. And I think last summer they struggled in some of those, but this year they've really, even when they got out of the summer, kind of into the fall, they kind of found their footing. And so far this year, everything's been really strong coming out of these trips. Wouldn't you say, Hud?
Yeah, I think that they've hit their groove when it comes to hosting these visits. And, it was a new staff last year. Visits were just being opened back up from COVID. So there was some funky stuff. And I think that, there are still a couple recruits that took those visits. I think, DJ Hicks is one in particular that we've talked about that took those visits last summer and maybe haven't been super eager to get back to Texas, or, they say they're eager, but they haven't gotten back on campus, where I think that Texas may actually shock them with how organized and just overall how good of a job they're doing hosting visits now. I mean, it is pretty rare that we get any sort of info that was borderline negative from a visit, which is great considering how loaded of a group they had on campus last weekend.
Yeah, a lot of big names. I think if you're looking for headliners, Jonte Cook was back again, and of
Three-fourths
course,
of the core four.
yeah, three-fourths of the core four with Manning being there last week, and then Cook, Anthony Hill, and Ruben Owens all on campus this week. Um, if you would like to see what Jonte Cook's visit looked like, there's a YouTube video for that somewhere, and it's been making the waves around social media for clips that have been, I would say, somewhat taken out of context
Yeah.
and posted. Um,
Also, real quick, for anybody listening to the pod, please don't freak out about that. We haven't even addressed it on the board because it's kind of not worth it. But Please
Yeah.
don't freak out about that.
Yeah, it's not worth it at this point. Jalen Brown, the five-star receiver from Miami's Gulliver Prep, made it down. Very good visit for him. Talked to his dad after the trip, and they're planning on coming back not only for possibly an official. They haven't locked anything in yet there, but another unofficial. So we're talking about one of the fastest players in the country, an elite speed demon at wide receiver, and a guy that to me, when I saw him last spring in 7-on-7, was one of the best players I saw overall in the spring. Jalen Brown, I think, would be an important add for Texas if they could make that move. It's going to be tough with Miami and their new staff there, but
Yeah.
I think getting him back on campus for another unofficial only helps your chances. Along the wide receiver, it was a big receiver weekend. I would say that was like probably the headlining group. Jaquez Petaway from Lingham Creek, Jonah Wilson from Decaney, Jaden Greathouse from Westlake. All those guys on campus. I think that probably this time last year, Texas was in middle of the pack for Jaquez Petaway, and A&M was being talked about a lot, Alabama a lot,
Yeah.
but I think Texas has quietly made a move to the front of the pack, and a lot of that in a short time with Brennan Marion here. If you know anything about Jaquez Petaway, he comes from I don't want to say like a bad background, but like just a working class background. I
Yeah.
think single parent who works, he works, and so he's got brothers that they share a car. So it's hard for him to make these visits the way other kids do. It's not always easy to get these parents who work on the weekends to say, okay, I'm going to take off work, spend the money to travel to Austin, and bring my kid here. So getting him back on campus was big. And from what I heard, everything went extremely well there. With Jonah Wilson, the big receiver from Decaney, that was his first time on campus. So, everything went off really strong there. Really liked practice, made a connection with a lot of the coaches and players. Very much expect him to be back in the summer for an official visit. And then Jaden Greathouse might as well just kind of pick out a dorm at this point. It seems like he's there every weekend. Um, we're going to talk a little bit more about him in the crystal ball segment because I did put a crystal ball in for him. But, Hudson brought up a good point. Like, he's just kind of an Austin kid,
Yeah.
more so than being a Westlake kid, more so than being a kid that potentially fit at Texas, like just an Austin type of kid. And so I think that a lot of things are in their favor there. Anything stand out to you about that receiver group?
I guess one thing that sticks out to me as well is that it is so loaded that a guy that, Texas might end up taking and has offered in Kyle Parker kind of flies a bit under the radar as far as, like that weekend. I guess another thing to keep an eye on would be that Jaquez Petaway and Jonah Wilson have kind of developed a close friendship. I don't think that there's any sort of package deal there, but as there rarely isn't in recruiting. But it is helpful that if Wilson is making a trip, Petaway can hop in the car with him. I don't know. I think that one of the big things from the weekend was just that Brennan Marion was kind of an alpha recruiter in addition to bringing the juice to practice. We heard that from our practice report. So, I mean, I think that with him in charge of the wide receiver room, along with Sark's longstanding relationships, kind of having to be the primary recruiter for a couple of these targets, I think Texas is really set up well with the 23 wideouts.
Yeah, and I would also add that when you talk about Brennan Marion and Tashard Choice, something we've heard is that they've just kind of brought a breath of fresh air and like youth to this staff. A lot of juice, a lot of energy. And they replaced two older assistants on the staff, two guys in Andre Coleman and Stan Drayton, who weren't known as big vocal guys. And Choice and Marion are kind of pure energy when you see them. So I think that's been something kind of sneaky. Speaking of Choice, Ruben Owens, it was a big visit for him. I mentioned in the Stampede that I don't feel like there's going to be a lot of shakeups in the recruitment or any big movements. But I feel that they checked a couple boxes with Ruben Owens that hadn't been checked yet, and one of those was his mother had not yet been to campus. He usually comes with his father, and his mother and sister both attended. From what I heard, were both very impressed with everything Texas had to offer, including Tashard Choice, and they've got a long-standing relationship with Brandon Harris, who's been recruiting him since his freshman year. So uh, again, I think Texas stands in a really strong position for Ruben. I don't think that changed over the weekend, but I do think there were a couple of extra boxes checked.
Another thing too, Mike. Again, it was such a loaded weekend. We haven't even talked a lot about the defensive prospects, but I want to go over one more guy on the offensive side of the ball. John Randall Jr. from Wichita, Kansas, goes to Heights High School. He's a guy that Texas offered on the visit, and according to a source, seemingly blown away. He was blown away by the visit experience, and that's a high 4-star running back that Texas is now seemingly in the mix with, in addition to guys like Javen Simpkins, Cedric Baxter. Like Tashard Choice has not only done a really good job, probably leading the pack for Ruben Owens, but since they're taking a second running back in the 23 class, he's also seemingly has a stable of guys for the RB2 position. Cam Cook from Round Rock Stony Point as well, that are all high on Texas, and that Texas could seemingly pick one to be in that secondary spot. So, I mean, if the current trend lines hold, it's just going to be a really, really strong showcase for Tashard Choice.
Yeah, and they need that punch at the offensive skill positions. They didn't get a lot of it in last year's class. I think, obviously they addressed their front lines, added a big secondary group, all that, but didn't get, I don't think, everything they needed out of the receiver and running back position. So good to see that they're kind of ahead of the pace there. On the defensive side of the ball, I would say it was also a big linebacker weekend. You had Anthony Hill on campus, Samaje Burrell made his commitment. Brad Spence was there. Darian Gillette came in before the weekend. But we're still going to count him as a weekend visitor. And then Jonathan Hall, the Katy safety, who's seen as Texas as kind of a hybrid, defender, all on campus. I think obviously the big name there is Anthony Hill. And when you talk about, what Texas can show him that's different, because he's been to Texas so many times, I think getting to see football was big for him. Anthony is just, if you know Anthony, he's a giant kid and really just kind of a football nerd. Like he loves talking ball, loves talking about scheme and fit. He's not real big into the flash of recruitment. He's a football kid. And so, getting to sit down in meetings and watch drills and go through the practice and all that, I think was probably big for him.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Another thing too, there were some comments that people got a little spooked about, with Samaje Burrell saying that he was, still potentially open to getting recruited. Samaje is pretty dang locked in with Texas, and also all the feedback that we got from the defensive side of the ball was, yeah, Samaje really wants me to, commit to Texas. He's recruiting me hard now. Every single Instagram post that a kid would put up with pictures from their Texas visit, Samaje was in the comments throwing up the horn. So again, like the John Tay Cook comments, like don't read too closely to every single thing that the kid says. They're still kids. They are just kind of going through the process as well. I think that Braylon Shelby is a guy that is a big priority for the Texas staff. That's kind of been proven through actions. Sark hitting him up nearly every day, PK being his lead recruiter, the amount of attention that he was shown on this visit. I think that Texas should feel very good about their chances, with the caveat of he is making a trip to Georgia pretty soon. And if Georgia does offer, that would be a little bit of a game changer, considering, they're Georgia. They're probably going to put, 12 dudes in the league on the defensive side of the ball this NFL draft. So, that just comes with the territory of recruiting, legit edges.
Yeah, South Oak Cliff edge Billy Walton also in town.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a little more on him, but I think Texas made a big move there. We got some clarity on where they see him. Jordan Matthews, the corner from Woodlawn in Baton Rouge is made his 4th visit to Texas since not even being offered a year ago. Obviously, that shows a ton of interest and initiative on his part. I think Texas has moved into the catbird seat for him and has been kind of throughout the spring. I've got a Texas crystal ball in on him as well. Anything else, I guess, that we want to hit before we turn away? I should mention we talked about Shelby, we talked about him, Walton, Desmond Ameazulu, the edge rusher from Maryland, who is a first cousin to Neto Ameazulu, also visited. I asked a couple people, what do you think about Desmond? And the answer was, well, he sure looks pretty. And sounds like he's all of 6'5", 6'6", long frame. And a lot of really positive comments coming out of the visit. I do think Texas is going to be able to get him back, possibly for an official visit, and then they're really in the game at that point. Anybody else you want to mention before we wrap up here and move on to our crystal ball segment?
Malachi Breland was the other new offer in addition to John Randall Jr. Breland is an offensive lineman out of Mississippi and kind of fits the Kyle Flood big humans mold. And I get that probably some fans are like, well, that's not all that they're looking for in offensive lineman. Like, is there anything else on the scouting report? He won offensive line MVP at the UC report camp in Dallas, I believe, a couple weeks ago. And the feedback from there was, yeah, he's really big and he can move some people and he, moves decently. So it's nice to see that Kyle Flood is staying true to his big humans evaluation process. And, that's just another guy to kind of monitor. Mike, I'm sure you've noticed this too, but I think Texas just isn't as they're not as afraid I shouldn't say afraid, but they're not as hesitant to go down into Mississippi, North Louisiana, South Louisiana, and just take swings with kids. I mean, it seems like Texas staffs in the past were really more focused on, maybe a couple Louisiana kids, but we're going to focus on Texas and the West Coast. And it's kind of nice to see the staff, go into SEC country and try to pick out some guys. Another guy that I didn't even mention that we probably should have is Zalance Hurd from Monroe, Louisiana, who the feedback I got from him was that, during the season, Texas was probably the outright leader. Now that LSU offered, it's probably Texas and LSU, but that's a high 4-star kid that, the weekend was so loaded. We're just now getting to around the, 17th minute of the pod.
Yeah, it was, really, really strong. And we had a lot of coverage of it throughout the week, so this is kind of just a quick hit wrap up. But if you want the full coverage of it, Horns 24/7 is the place to go. Subscribe, and you can pick that up. All right, Hudson, I entered 5 new crystal balls in for Texas targets over the week. It was a big edition of crystal balling. We've talked about 3 of those guys. Jordan Matthews, again, I think Texas has kind of just moved into a good position there. Billy Walton, who I think, there were a lot of questions on where he was going to fit in the class and if he would fit in the numbers, and we got indications he would. So I do like where Texas sits, with the caveat of he does have an Oklahoma State official visit upcoming. And, obviously on an official visit, things could change. So we'll kind of watch that one. And then Jaden Greathouse, who we mentioned, kind of an Austin kid and just seems like he's, been around campus every week. So anything you want to add on those 3 guys?
When we first saw Billy Walton kind of take the next step for Sock during the playoff run, and there was some talk that, Chris Gilbert was doing a good job in that recruitment, I definitely could see it going this way, but it is a kind of fun development, just considering that that's a guy that, you specifically watched for like 6 weeks of the playoff run and that I kind of grew a liking to. I think that is a fun development. I wrote about him, I want to say, at my last spot, like in October, with the caveat of, maybe one day if he continues to bulk up, he can be a Texas level guy. So seeing that the Texas staff views him at that level right now is pretty cool. Mike, again, a little inside baseball, I guess, for the podcast, but I'll probably follow you on the Jaden Greathouse crystal ball in the near future. it's just one of those ones where it just feels too obvious. We've talked about it, I think, since the day I got to 247 of like, okay, when do we want to put that one in? It just makes too much sense right now. So I'd say that goes well. And then for anybody who isn't as familiar with Great House's potential fit at Texas, Mike might have a little bit more details, but basically what we've been told was that he's a take regardless of where you put him. It doesn't matter if it's an H or a, Z receiver or even an X. They just think that he's going to be able to win matchups and, create, advantages in the passing game. So I wouldn't worry too much about fit if you're a Texas fan right now. They just see him as a pass catcher that's going to be lethal at the next level.
Yeah, the other two ones I put in were going away from Texas. Javon Thomas, the South Oak Cliff defensive back, sounds like things are trending pretty heavily to Texas A&M. Now, I did write this Wednesday night in Mike at Night. Texas not completely out of it. They will get probably, I would say, the last visit Javon takes on Easter weekend. Him and his father are going back down there to spend some time with the staff. And so we'll see what kind of push they can make coming out of that. I do think it's going to have to be a big one. A&M has really cemented themselves in that race and done a fantastic job. He's also going to LSU this next weekend. And then the other one was Braylon James, who I guess I was going to say Del Valley receiver Braylon James. Now Round Rock Stony Point wide receiver Braylon James, who looks to be headed to Notre Dame. Anything you want to add on those two, Hud?
Yeah, we've kind of felt like Braylon James was headed to Notre Dame for a while. I didn't put in a crystal ball pick. I probably won't, but everybody seems to understand he's probably going to Notre Dame. And then I did put one in for Javon Thomas, but that detail you mentioned, and you broke the news last night that he was going to visit Texas on April 16th. I still feel like he's going to end up at A&M, but I am intrigued that Texas likely will have the last visit. And even if it's not the last visit, if they can have a good enough pitch, they could probably force A&M to get him on campus one more time before he decides pretty soon. So that wrinkle is pretty good. And I think that just shows why having these connections in, Dallas with Chris Gilbert is such a big deal because, Mike, I don't know how you feel about this. I'm not sold that a previous Texas staff would even get him back on campus with the way things are trending.
No, I don't think so.
Exactly.
Joe Thomas, his dad, and Chris Gilbert go way back. And I think they feel a need to, give Texas a shot here at the end. And Javon hasn't been on campus he was here last summer for the mega camp thing they did with Arch, but really hasn't been for like a one of the more, intimate type visit settings where you can spend a lot of one-on-one time. So, I think that's what Texas is pushing to get him for and see if they can make a difference that way.
Yeah, and they caught a bad break with the Texas Relays just not being able to host him because he was competing. So that was an unfortunate break, but instead of just tucking tail and going on to the next target, they're battling it in there when it seems like A&M is the presumptive choice. So, it close only counts in, horseshoes and hand grenades, but I do think that a tip of the cap, deserves to be sent towards the Texas staff's way just for getting Javon back on campus on the 16th.
Yep. So we'll see kind of how that shakes out. Aside from that, Dylan Raiola will be on campus on the 16th, I believe, as well. That's a good segue into
I was about to say.
Talking about our 2024 rankings. That is the new number one player in the country, Dylan Raiola. And really, if you count Quinn Ewers in the 2022 cycle, will be the third straight player and the third straight quarterback that Texas has been kind of deep in on. That is the number one overall player in the country: Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, Dylan Raiola. I think we'll go. Let me first just talk a little bit about Raiola. It's funny to me and Hudson, I've got a really good relationship with the family. So just, behind the curtain, they used to live in Burleson. I live in Crowley. Our houses were 10 minutes apart. I met them very early in the process before really any offers had come and just through that have a very, very, very good relationship with their family. Um, there are a lot of people out there who keep wanting to tell me where Dylan Raiola is for sure going to college, and it, it generates laughs from his camp when I pass that on. So um, I think for anybody discounting Texas, I'm not here to tell you Texas leads for him, but anybody discounting Texas is being foolish because they are doing a lot of research into these schools. Dominic Raiola, his dad, played at the NFL level. He understands NFL development at a high level and really loves and trusts Steve Sarkisian to develop quarterbacks. I mean, he's part of a handful of coaches recruiting him that he really feels strongly about when it comes to uh, coaching quarterbacks. And so I think that Texas is very much in the race. AJ Milwee has done a tremendous job just keeping um, that relationship going. And a big thing is they've been really open with him. Yes, we are pursuing Arch Manning. Yes, he is our number one priority in 2023. And guess what? Dylan is our priority in 2024, and we're going to recruit both of them. And I think some other schools maybe have tried to kind of play the tightrope with that deal, whereas Texas has just been very open about it. Dominic playing at the NFL level knows where regardless of where you go, you're going to face big competition. So I do think that getting Arch Manning would probably be a little bit of a blow for that race. But I mean, if you look at the other schools recruiting him, USC's got a couple of crystal balls lately. Well, USC has Malachi Nelson in this class, who is rated just behind Arch Manning, both at quarterback and overall. And so there's going to be a guy there. I'm sure Ohio State's going to get a guy. I'm sure Georgia's going to get a guy. I mean, Arch could be in play for Georgia. So, it's just I would say don't get too bogged down early. It's still very early for Dylan, and I can't see him really making a crazy decision this soon or anything.
Yeah, it was kind of funny yesterday when rankings release happened, and some of the first comments are, "Oh, well, he's just USC and Ohio State," and it's one of those things where I understand you're as a fan sometimes you're trying to maybe protect yourself of okay, I don't need to get my hopes up, but like Mike said, and I'll say it a little bit more brashly, like nobody has better intel on the Rail list than Mike will. It's just the truth. So when you're trying to tell us, oh, it's USC or Ohio State, even though he does have crystal balls and other predictions across the industry for both USC and Ohio State, which I kind of don't get the Ohio State one at this point, but that's not necessarily the case behind the scenes. So you've got to especially trust us on that one. Trust us in general, but especially with Dylan Raiola, let's not tell us where he's going to go to school.
Quick, let's just kind of go through the 24 rankings. What stood out to you? I'll tell you right off the bat, to me, early on at least, doesn't seem like 24 is as loaded of a class in Texas. When you look at guys, you don't have an obvious Ruben Owens or guys like that, Anthony Hill. So while there is talent, there's always going to be talent in the state. And oddly enough, Texas did have the most kids in the top 247. I just don't think it's quite as loaded at the top.
Yeah. So for me, with like my own evaluation process, I kind of have it where I think Micah Hudson's probably a tier above everybody else in the 2024 class. For those unfamiliar, he's a wide receiver out of Lake Belton High School, which is in Temple, Texas. I think he's probably a little bit above everybody else as far as my own grading goes. And he was a top 40 player according to 247. And then you have your guys that we've seen impress, and sure there might be a couple question marks as prospects, but they're extremely solid players. And Colin Simmons, Nigel Smith, Jelani Watkins has unreal testing. He ended up being the top player in the state for 2024, wide receiver out of Klein Forest. He is a verified 10 too. And for those who understand the 247 rankings process, verified measurables are a big deal because that's what NFL scouting departments care about. Having that verified speed along with, arm length, height, it does matter more than I think I even understood as a consumer. And I think that most fans realize. So, guys like Jelani Watkins and Zena Mozelo who fit the, you know, next level measurables or traits, they're going to get ranked higher.
Yeah, and especially early, right? We've got to bet on
Exactly.
traits early because these kids have in most cases 1 year of film. So
Exactly.
it makes me laugh. I mean, our rankings reaction threads are always going to be full of hot takes, regardless. But I think we were talking with Gabe Brooks offline about something, and he just kind of said anybody that's got a hot take about sophomores, I can't imagine having any hot takes about these kids. They're going to change so much in the next couple of years that it would be tough to just say, oh, this for sure is wrong or right.
Yeah. Were there any other 24s where you were really happy to see a guy slotted where they were? I have one that I'm sure you can guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to call ISO and clear the lane, I'll pass you the ball and you can talk about Terry Bussey.
Ooh, okay. Terry Bussey's a good one. I was actually going to do Freddie.
Yeah, Freddie, of course. Freddie Dubois is a favorite of Hudson and I's from
Yeah.
Schertz Clemens, and again another really high end athlete. But I figured you'd want to take time to talk about your favorite little guy.
I'll listen. If you give me the chance, I'll do both. So Terry Bussey out of Timpson is a guy. I think the first time I met you, Mike, in person, I was talking to you about Terry Bussey. He's a 2A multiple time All State prospect, and I'll just give the case for Terry Bussey right now. So he plays at Timpson High School, which is traditionally a kind of cellar dweller school in East Texas. And in his freshman and sophomore years, he's led them to back-to-back state semifinal appearances, where the teams that they lost to were Dalton and Doug Brooks freshman year by about $1 billion, and then sophomore year Timpson had the ball and were going down the field to score before an unfortunate interception against the same Shiner team. So Terry Bussey has the production of a legit high caliber D1 athlete, in addition to recently the testing with a verified 10.81 100 meter, to where it just makes a lot of sense for him to be slotted, I believe, at 202 or 201, which is where I think 247 ended up ranking him. So that was one I was very excited about, because before the kid even had any offers, I was annoying Mike saying, hey, have you watched this kid from Timpson? And then Freddie Dubois from Schertz Clemens, that's one that I am pretty proud of, because I wrote about Freddie when he had one offer and he was pretty desperate to get some more attention on the recruiting scene. I wrote about him. I mentioned that he didn't have a huddle page, but he did have a site out of San Antonio made a really nice YouTube highlight compilation for him. And when you did some more research, it turned out that Freddie had 8 out of Schertz Clemens' 13 touchdowns. So while the production wasn't staggering, he was dominant for a relatively bad, a 2-8 team that, he then backed up on the track by winning as a freshman the 6A Region 4 triple jump, in addition to his 200-meter times, which are always some of the best in the state. So that was a guy, I think Freddie ended up at 113 with that. I was very happy. And Mike, I'm sure you agree with this, but I think he probably has the most room to go up as well as anybody on the 24 rankings, because he does have the verified athleticism backed up with some production. So I think that as we continue to get some more data points on Freddie Dubois, he might even go up, another 40, 50 spots.
Yeah, definitely could. He's got, the profile too, I guess they would say.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So those rankings are out. Our full reaction pieces are up on Horns 24/7. Check those out. Before we get out of here, Hudson, you had a hypothetical for us that you wanted to get into.
Yeah. So who are some of the sneaky Texas staff bang on the table prospects for? And as I literally just banged on my table and caused the camera to shake. So who are some of the prospects that maybe fans don't view them in the same tier as the Anthony Hills, the Jonte Cooks of the world, but the Texas staff feels just as fanatic about, if not maybe a slight tier below?
We've talked about Braylon Shelby a lot. I think he's up there. Definitely. He's a guy that they love and feel that can be and we've talked, you and I've talked, is an NFL type body. He's a guy that profiles a lot of the same way that guys that went to Washington and played for PK and were drafted. Um, there was a kid out of Allen that went to Washington,
Levi
Levi
Onzuruike?
Unzorke.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think similar
Sorry.
type of body in high school. I was drafted second round, I think, last year,
Mhm.
second or third round, and became a really productive player at Washington. Those are the things I think PK is kind of looking for on defense. Not really a finished product, not a production machine, although he does have good production. But I think just a guy that they see a lot of traits in, and so yeah, he would be up there for me. Um, I would probably say Jaden Greathouse. I think they love Jaden
Yeah.
Greathouse. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody I talk to in Texas is just, that kid's a winner. That kid goes and wins the ball every time. He's a culture guy. He loves football, those types of things. I think Greathouse, I know that obviously he's a really good player. A lot of people love him in high school, but I think colleges have been kind of in that middle ground with him. And so
Mhm.
it was an important step this year for Texas to kind of say, no, you're our guy. You're a priority for us.
Yeah. What do you think about maybe like a Tyler Turner as that answer?
Yeah, Tyler Turner would definitely be up there. Again, another guy who was there over the weekend that we didn't talk a lot about, but
Mhm.
from San Antonio, Brennan, good athlete, was committed to Baylor, got offered by Texas at their junior day, and is now talking about coming back in the summer for an official visit as well. So, yeah, I think Tyler Turner would definitely be up there. Anybody else? I mean, like beforehand, like Samaj, like people.
That's what
I
I was going to say.
Yeah,
Samaje would have been the perfect answer for this 2 weeks ago because he's a guy that I think the stargazers weren't paying super close attention to. And then, once it started trending, once we put in the first crystal balls, it was like, oh, okay, this is a little bit more serious than I thought.
yeah, he would definitely be up there. I'm trying to think on the offensive side of the ball, maybe Andre Kojo.
Andre Kojo's a great shout. That's somebody that Texas really likes. And I'd say, again, if you look at his profile, it'd be like most people would probably think that that's a kid that they would go silent on when it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah, so there are definitely a couple of those guys. This staff has not been shy about making their evaluations, sticking to their evaluations. We'll see down the line if those evaluations work out, but they aren't. They are recruiting true to themselves. It seems like at this point. Anything else you want to add, Huddy, before we get out of here?
I don't think so. I guess one thing, there isn't going to be a big visit weekend this upcoming week just because Texas has a big coaches clinic. There will still be some good info from that clinic. Once you get that many coaches around, there will be some rumors flying, some secrets being shared, but going to be a low key recruiting weekend. And then there will be some prospects on campus for April 16th. We've mentioned a couple. I don't think we mentioned him, but Anthony White from Abernathy will be making the trip on April 16th. But you're going to kind of get a little bit of a slower paced couple of weekends before official visit season starts. And that's when the ball really gets rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're kind of getting into that mode. Spring football coming around for high school, state 7-on-7, getting ready to crank up here soon. State track and field. So really going to be a busy and fun, late spring, early summer here. So stick with us over at Horns 24/7 for all that great coverage. All right, we appreciate everybody for listening. We appreciate everybody for interacting with the show when they do. I think we'll maybe next week, since there's not a ton going on, maybe we'll do a mailbag next week, and get some more show interaction. We haven't done that in a couple of weeks. We want to thank Taylor Estes for making the show happen on the back end. For Hudson Standish, I'm Mike Roach. We will see you guys next week.